Indra accordingly sent a Devangana to the forest. The young rishi was placed by his father Vibhandak on a mala in order that he might not be devoured by lions or tigers. The young boy, having seen the woman, was at first frightened, but soon after he was charmed with her beauty and singing. As his father was absent, she brought him to Ayodhya. Dashratha cordially received him, and shortly after he gave away his foster daughter in marriage to him. Vibhandak knew by his yoga that his son was taken to Ayodhya in his absence, and got so much enraged that he immediately went to that city to curse the woman to death. Dashratha treated him with respect, and on finding that his son was married to the foster daughter of the king, he was pleased with him and blessed him, saying that four mighty sons would be born to him. The rishi then made a havan. The god Agni came out of it and entrusted to Vasistha a thali full of payas and told him to divide it equally among the three wives of the king so that they might get sons as soon as they partook of it. Vasishtha made three pindas of the payas and gave the largest of them to Kausalya, the eldest wife of Dashratha, and the other two to Sumitra and Kaikeyi. Kaikeyi, the third wife of the king, became jealous and said that she was entitled to the largest pinda because she supported the chariot of the king by her own hands, which was about to give way during the battle with the demons. While she was thus quarreling about it, a ghar, which is kite, from above snatched the pinda from her hands and flew in the air with it. She became exceedingly sorry and began to weep when Dashratha prevailed upon Kausalya to divide her pinda into two halves and give one to Kaikeyi and keep the other for herself. Kausalya accordingly did it, and Sumitra also did the same thing in compliance with the wishes of the king. Thus, Kaikeyi got one full pinda for herself, which she ate heartily. Kausalya and Sumitra ate their own halves. Soon after, the three ladies became pregnant. The pinda which was snatched by the ghar, which is the kite, from the hands of Kaikeyi fell by a blast of wind into the hands of Anjani, the wife of a monkey called Kesari. She also swallowed up the pinda and became pregnant. The story of the child born to Anjani is as follows. Anjani, the wife of Kesari, performed a severe penance for 7 years on the hills called Rishi Parvat in order that the god Shiva might be pleased to bless her with an immortal son. Shiva was pleased with her and said, "An immortal son will be born to you as your wish. He will be part of my body. I therefore tell you to sit here in meditation and swallow up anything that falls into your hands so that your wish will be fulfilled." So saying, Shiva disappeared. The pinda from the bill of the ghar fell into the hands of Anjani and she swallowed it up as directed by Shiva. The ghar was a Devangana who had become a bird by the curse of Indra. This god was displeased with her because she did not dance properly, and it was appointed by Brahmadev that she would be released from the curse as soon as the pinda fell into the hands of Anjani. The Devangana was accordingly released from the curse, and after her release, she went to Indra. Anjani, after a period of 9 months, was delivered of a powerful son called Maruti. He was a monkey and had a long tail. When he saw the light, he was hungry, and when he did not get anything to eat, he went to devour the son, taking him for a fruit. At the same time, Rahu also came to devour the son when Maruti said to him, "Who are you?" "I have come here first to devour the fruit." So saying, he broke the head of Rahu with his tail and catching him by his feet, flung him down. Ketu then came to help him, but he was also severely beaten up by the monkey. In the meantime, Maruti was brought down by his father, the wind. After 9 months, Kausalya, Sumitra, and Kaikeyi were delivered of sons. Rama was born to Kausalya, Lakshman to Sumitra, and the twins Bharat and Shatrughna to Kaikeyi. They grew up, and the ceremonies of investing them with sacred threads were performed. They were taught by Vasishtha the Vedas and mantras. On his return from a pilgrimage, Vishwamitra, a rishi, came to Ayodhya. Dashratha received him cordially and worshipped him with devotion. The rishi blessed him and said to him, Dashratha, I want you to give me a promise that you will give me whatever I will ask from you. The king gave him the promise the rishi required. When the latter said to the former, We all the rishis are very much troubled by the demons, Maricha, Subahu, and others. They have often destroyed our havans. So, consequently, we are not able to perform our yajna successfully. No one can kill them except Rama. I therefore wish you to send Rama with me to kill the demons. Dashratha was startled and replied, Rishi, how can I send my tender child with you? How can he kill the mountain like demons? You may ask me for any other thing, but not Rama. Vishwamitra became very indignant and said, You ought to have considered well before you gave me the promise. At any rate, I must now take Rama with me. In the meantime, Vasishtha came there and advised the king to send Rama with the rishi, saying that if he did not listen to him, he would curse him and his sons, as he was obstinate and of a choleric disposition. Dashratha then brought Rama and Lakshmana before his sabha and gave them in charge of the rishi. Vishwamitra, then accompanied by two young boys, set out for the forest where the rishis were performing their yajna. But on the road they were encountered by Tatika, a hideous and frightful demoness. She had the strength of 10,000 elephants, her chest was as large as a mountain, her hair and dress were saturated with blood, the strings of the dead bodies were put round her neck, and her head was besmeared with sindoor. As soon as she saw them, she opened her mouth and went with other demonesses to devour them, when Rama instantly killed her with one arrow. 20 crores of demons, headed by Banasur, a very powerful demon, then came upon Rama to revenge the killing of the demoness. But they all were repulsed by him with heavy loss. After the defeat of the demons, they proceeded on their journey. And when they came near Ashila, it began to tremble as soon as the dust from the feet of Rama fell upon it. And no sooner did he touch it with his feet than it became a beautiful woman who, bowing to Rama, returned to her husband. The story of how the woman became Ashila is as follows. Brahmadev had a very beautiful daughter named Ahalya. Many gods and kings requested her father to give her away in marriage to them. But Brahmadev had made a condition that whoever would go round the earth and return within 6 hours should marry her without loss of time. Whereupon all the kings and gods, including Indra, went round the earth, but none could return within 6 hours except Gautam, a rishi to whom Ahalya was married agreeably to the condition. Indra became very jealous of the rishi and sought to outrage her modesty. Some time after his marriage, he and his wife went to a river with rishis for ablutions on the day of an eclipse. After their ablutions were over, Gautam sat there with other rishis for meditation, and his wife returned home. While she was alone in her abode, Indra went there in the form of her husband and outraged her modesty. In the meantime, Gautam returned home, and finding Indra in the abode, he cursed him and Ahalya, saying that there would be 1,000 ulcers on the body of the god, and that his wife would be a Shila and remain in that state for 60,000 years. But that as there was no fault on her part, she would be released from the curse when Rama would touch her with his feet. Ahalya accordingly became a Shila and Indra a peacock with 1,000 ulcers on his body. While the god in the form of a peacock was flying about in forest, the other gods prayed to Gautam for him, who, having been pleased with them, restored Indra to his former state and turned all the ulcers on his body into ice. After the release of Ahalya from the curse, Vishwamitra proceeded on his journey with Rama and Lakshmana. Shatanand, a son of Ahalya and the priest of the king Janak, also accompanied him. They all arrived at the city of Mathila and put up at a garden there. At the request of Rama, Vishwamitra related the story of the birth of Sita, a daughter of Janak, which is as follows. There was a king called Padmaksha. One day he said to Lakshmi, wife of Vishnu, I wish you would be born in my family and become my daughter. She replied, if I be born in your family and I become your daughter, you will be miserable. I have, however, no objection to become your daughter if my husband tell me to do so. Whereupon the king performed a severe penance to gain the favor of Vishnu, who was pleased with him and gave him a fruit, which the king took at home and kept with him. After 9 months were over, the fruit bore a female child, the same Lakshmi. The king, having got a daughter, became exceedingly glad and named the child Padmakshi. She grew up and became marriageable. Many kings, demigods, and rishis requested her father to give her away in marriage to them. But he refused to comply with their request, saying that he would marry her to a man whose body was dark blue. At this refusal, they all got enraged and killed the king on the spot. Whereupon his daughter threw herself into a oven in which the consecrated fire was burning. At that time, Ravan happened to look at her and was captivated with her charms. He immediately extinguished the fire with a view to catch her, but she disappeared. He found in the oven 5 ratnas, which he gave to his wife Mandodari. The 5 ratnas were placed by Ravana and his wife in a box. And soon after, they found to their great surprise that a female child played in it with pleasure. Ravana lifted the child, but Mandodari said, if you keep this child here, the whole of Lanka will be set on fire. The kingdom of Padmaksha was annihilated on account of this child, and the poor king was killed by the kings and demigods who had gone there to marry her. I therefore propose that the box should be thrown somewhere else. Ravana was alarmed and ordered his minister to bury the box in the kingdom of Janak, who was the bitterest enemy of the demon king. The minister accordingly ordered his men to carry the box and bury it as directed by Ravana. The men lifted up the box when the child said, I shall again come here and extirpate all the demons. Ravana got enraged and was about to kill the child when Mandodari prevented him from doing so. The box was then carried at night and buried in the field presented by Janak to a Brahman. One day, while the Brahman was ploughing his field, he found the box and carried it to the king. The box was opened, and to the great astonishment of all, a girl of the age of 5 years was found in it. As soon as the king saw her, he was moved with affection and brought her up as his daughter. One day, Parashuram, having killed all the Kshatriyas on earth, came to the kingdom of Janak. He went into the palace with the king to take the dinner, and when he came out after dinner, he found that someone had removed the Dhanusha placed by him at the court of the king. He was greatly enraged and said, who has taken my Dhanusha? It is so heavy that cannot be removed even by thousands of elephants. So saying, he came out of the court with the king to look for it, but to his great surprise, he saw the girl riding on it. No sooner did she behold her father than she left the Dhanusha there and ran away. When Parashurama said to the king, My incarnation is now over. Let the Dhanusha be here. I now advise you to hold a Swayamvar and marry your daughter to any man who will lift up the bow and break it off." So saying, Parshuram left for his abode. Soon after, the king held a Swayamvar and invited to it all the kings and rishis on earth. All attended the Swayamvar, including Ravana, who came there without invitation. The king told the assembly that Sita would be married to any man who would lift up the Dhanusha and break it off. Many kings attempted to lift up, but they all failed in their attempt. Ravana then stepped forward and loudly said with pride and vanity, "This bow is a trifling thing to me. I shall break it off in a second. I know you all weak kings and rishis will not be able to lift it up. It is I who would lift up the Dhanusha and break it off. Sita will be my wife, and I shall be her husband." So saying, he began to lift up the Dhanusha with all his strength and force. And while he was lifting it up, it fell heavily on his breast, and consequently he panted for breath and implored others to help him, when Rama immediately removed it at the suggestion of Vishwamitra and broke it into two pieces. Sita, who was seated all the time on the back of an elephant, put the garland in her hands round the neck of Rama when Ravana returned to Lanka with shame and confusion. Janak informed Dasharatha of the Swayamvar and requested him to come to Mithila to celebrate the marriage of his son with Sita. Dashratha, full of joy, went to Mithila with his wife, sons, and courtiers. Soon after, Rama was married to Sita, and Varmila, Maliti, and Shrutakirti, the other daughters of Janak, to Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughna, respectively. Rama knew that Parashuram would come and fight with him on account of the Dhanusha he had broken, and therefore he did not like to stay any longer at Mithila. But at the request of his father in law, he stayed there for a few days more. In the meantime, Narada went to Parashuram and told him that a man called Rama had broken his Dhanusha. He was greatly enraged at this news, and having come to Mithila, he kicked up a great row about the Dhanusha. To foment the quarrel, Narada told him that Rama had broken the bow and that he was so proud that he did not even come down to receive him. Parshuram got indignant and let off arrows at Rama, which melted away as soon as the latter saw them. Parshuram, knowing that his incarnation was over, laid down his arms and weapons when Rama came down and embraced him heartily. Soon after, Dashratha, accompanied by his wives, sons, returned to Ayodhya with exultation and joy. The king had invited to the marriage of Rama his brother-in-law Sangramjit, who requested the former to send Bharat and Shatrughna to spend a few days with him. Dashratha bade his sons go with him, though they were unwilling to part with his brothers Rama and Lakshmana for a single moment. Kaikeyi pressed her sons to go with her brother, and they accordingly went with him. Rama and Lakshmana were very obedient to their parents and served them with all their heart and soul. One day, the king, looking to his old age, made up his mind to install Rama in the throne of Ayodhya. He made every preparation to perform the ceremony of installation and invited to it all the kings and rishis on earth. All gods and Brahmas were afraid that if Rama was installed in the throne of Ayodhya, he would not go to Lanka and relieve them from the oppression of the demons. Viranchi, one of the gods, therefore sent one Vikalpa to go to Ayodhya and prejudice Kaikeyi and all the subjects of the king against Rama and put an obstacle in the performance of the ceremony so that the prince might go to the forest of the demons and kill them all. Vikalpa tried his utmost to prejudice them against Rama, but they were all so good and pious that they remained faithful to the prince. There was only one wicked woman, Mantra, a favorite maid servant of Kaikeyi, whom he prejudiced against Rama. She hated the prince, and with a view to deprive him of the throne of Ayodhya, she went into the room of Kaikeyi and throwing herself on the ground, began to beat her breast with tears in her eyes. When Kaikeyi asked what the cause of her grief was, Mantra replied, "You unfortunate woman, your husband is going to install Rama in the throne of Ayodhya, and as soon as he is placed on the throne, he will kill your both sons. I shall be very glad if your Bharat is installed in the throne." Kaikeyi said, "I have no objection to the installation of Rama, whom I love as my son, Bharat." Mantra got exceedingly enraged and began to cry violently. Kaikeyi went to quiet her when Vikalpa also prejudiced her against Rama. Mantra, seeing a sudden change in her mistress, was mightily pleased with her and kissed her. Kaikeyi said, "My dearest, just tell me what I should do to get rid of Rama." "And how?" replied Mantra. "We must send him away and have our Bharat placed on the throne of Ayodhya. I therefore tell you with pleasure that if the king comes to you, ask him to fulfill the promise given by him to you during the battle he had fought with the demons in heaven. Do you remember the promise given by him to you? He promised you that he would give you whatever you would ask from him as a reward for helping him in the battle. You should, therefore, ask the king to send Rama to the forest of the demons for 14 years and place Bharat on the throne of Ayodhya. And another thing is that if the prince goes to the forest, the king will soon die of grief for his son, and it will be then a very good thing for you and your sons to pass your days in happiness." Kaikeyi liked the advice of Mantra, and before the king came to her room at night, she had taken off her ornaments and thrown herself on the ground with her hair in disorder. In the meantime, the king entered her room and asked her what the matter was. When she replied, "You wicked king, be gone. I know your heart. You are going to banish my sons to a forest and give the kingdom to Rama." Dashratha replied, "What you say is untrue, because I love Bharat and Shatrughna as much as I love Rama and Lakshmana." Kaikeyi replied, "Be gone, I do not want you in my room." The king felt it bad when Kaikeyi spoke those words, and in order to pacify her, asked her what she wanted from him. When Kaikeyi replied, "The promise given to me by you during the battle with the demons must be now fulfilled. What I want from you is that you should banish Rama to the forest of demons for 14 years and install my son Bharata in the throne of Ayodhya." The king was thunderstruck when Kaikeyi made the cruel demand and persuaded her much to ask him for something else, but she would not mind him. In the meantime, his faithful minister Sumant came and informed the king, who was lying on the ground in disorder, that everything was ready for performing the ceremony of installation when the latter told the former what had happened in the room of Kaikeyi. The minister, being exceedingly sorry, went and called Rama in the room of Kaikeyi. The prince came and implored his father to tell him the cause of his grief, when Kaikeyi replied, "The king had given me a promise at the battle with the demons that he would give me whatever I would ask from him. I have asked him to fulfill that promise, and since then he has been very sorry." Rama said, "I think he is not able enough to comply with your demand." Kaikeyi replied, "I should think so." "Well," said Rama, "if my father cannot give you what you want from him, I promise to give it to you." Kaikeyi replied, "Then go to the forest of the demons for 14 years with Lakshmana and let my son Bharat rule the Ayodhya." Rama said, "Most willingly. I have no objection to do so. It is just the same thing to me, because Bharat and I are one." Rama then taking his leave of Kaikeyi went to his mother Kausalya, and told her what had happened. Kausalya became very sorry and said, "You shall not leave me. Hide yourself in my room for 14 years, and I shall keep the secrecy. I cannot remain without you." Rama replied, "Mother, excuse me. I am now bound by my promise to go to the forest." He then went to Lakshmana and told him all that had taken place, when the latter said, "I shall accompany you. I cannot live here without you, and if you leave me here alone and go to the forest, I shall commit suicide." Rama, having consented to take Lakshmana with him, went to his wife Sita and said, "I am going to the forest of the demons for 14 years, and until I return to Ayodhya, I ask you to live with Kausalya. I cannot take you with me in the forest, as you are delicate and will not able to bear hardship with me." "I shall follow you," replied Sita, "and share any misfortune that may befall you. I therefore go down on my knees and implore you not to leave me here alone." Whereupon Rama consulted Vasishtha and promised Sita that he would also take her with him. Lastly, he went to take his leave of Dashratha, when the king said with tears in his eyes, "I feel much for you. The wicked and wretched woman has done this all, and I do not think I shall live until you return to Ayodhya. I shall die of grief for you, as I cannot tell you to break the promise given by you to Kaikeyi. I give you my consent to go to the forest. Child, take with you all necessary things and pass your days in happiness." "Father," replied Rama, "I do not want anything. I shall dress myself in Valkalyas and pass my days in meditation." As soon as Rama spoke these words, Kaikeyi brought Valkalyas and placed them before Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana, who dressed themselves in them and set out for the forest with the minister Sumanth. They arrived at Shramgavera, where Rama sat down for rest on the grass under the shade of a tree near a beautiful river, and having refreshed himself there, requested a fisherman called Guhaka, who was his devotee, to convey him with Sita and Lakshmana to the other side of the river. Guhaka asked him who he was, when he informed him that he was Rama, the eldest son of Dashratha, whereupon the fisherman, having embraced him, conveyed him with Sita and Lakshmana to the other side of the river, when Sumanth took his leave of the prince and returned to Ayodhya. Rama then went to the abode of Bharadwaja, a rishi who worshipped him, and requested him to stay for about 15 days, when the prince said, "I cannot stay with you any longer, because the people of Ayodhya will often come here and entreat me to return to the kingdom. I shall therefore go to the Dandakaranya." At the request of Rama, Bharadwaj showed him the way that led to the hills called Chitrakuta, where many learned rishis lived. He went up to the hills and saw Valmika, a rishi, and worshipped him with respect and reverence. Lakshmana built a Parnakutika there, and they all lived in it. On the return of Sumanth to Ayodhya, Dashratha died of grief for Rama. It was a pity that none of his sons were present at the time of his death. His wives Kausalya and Sumitra much mourned for the king, but Kaikeyi did not shed a tear for him. To perform the funeral ceremony of the king, his sons Bharat and Shatrughna were sent for, and until they returned to Ayodhya, his body was preserved in the kadai full of oil. Soon after, Bharat and Shatrughna returned to the city, and having seen the lifeless body of their father, they violently cried and much lamented for him. Vasishtha said, "The body of the king cannot be burnt unless someone is placed on the throne of Ayodhya. Rama and Lakshmana have gone to the forest, and I therefore ask Bharat to occupy the throne, as Kaikeyi has got them banished to the forest to secure the throne for him." At this information, Bharat was startled and said to Vasishtha with tears in his eyes, "Oh, How can I bear this grief? I do not want the kingdom. I want nothing from this city. I go down on my knees and beseech you not to install me in the throne, as my beloved Rama is a rightful claimant of it. I will go wherever Rama is and pass my days with him. Having known the heart of the Bharat, Vasistha placed the Padukas of Rama on the throne and proclaimed him as the king of Ayodhya. Shortly after, the body of Dashratha was carried to the funeral ground and burned with all his wives except Kausalya, Sumitra, and Kaikeyi. Kausalya and Sumitra were ready to burn themselves with their husband, but Vasistha prevented them from doing so as they had sons. After the funeral ceremony of Dashratha was over, Bharat went and saw his mother Kaikeyi when she said, "Son, I have caused Rama and Lakshmana to be banished to a forest and secured the kingdom for you with the great difficulty. Now, without delay, take the charge of the kingdom and you will be happy. We have now no enemies, and it is a very good sign that the king has also died." Bharat got very much enraged at what he had heard from Kaikeyi and replied, "You are a murderess of your husband and an enemy of Rama. It is most sinful, wicked, and disgraceful on your part to cause the death of my father and the banishment of my dear brother to the forest. Rama is the rightful claimant of the throne. Let him come and take his kingdom. I want nothing except Rama and shall pass my days with him in the forest." So saying, he dressed himself in Valkalyas and set out for Chitrakuta to join his brothers. He was followed by Vasistha, Kausalya, Sumitra, Shatrughna, Sumant, and other people of Ayodhya who were very anxious to see Rama. They all arrived at the river where Guhaka had his hut, and at the request of Bharat, the fisherman conveyed all the people to the other side of the river. Lakshmana, having seen the people, thought that Kaikeyi had sent them to kill Rama and began to let off arrows at them. But Rama stopped him, saying that they were not his enemies. Shortly after, they all reached the Parnakutika of Rama when the prince embraced them very affectionately and asked his mother how the king was doing.